Hello, I'm Thomas, and I'm going to be talking about formally verifying verifiable mixed nets in electronic voting. This is joint work with Rajiv and Bhavesh. So, just a brief clarifier before I begin, in this talk, what I'm really trying to talk about is verifiable electronic voting without a paper trail. So we're talking about what is sometimes referred to as sort of online voting. We're not talking about the myriad of electronic voting systems which have electronic components but are kind of, in some sense, paper-based. So in these online voting systems, you have things called verifiable mixed nets. And the basic idea is they take a vector of inputs, they mix it, and they create a vector of outputs. And so you kind of have basically ballots coming in, being randomized in their order, and then coming out again. And this is very similar to how ballot boxes work in traditional voting. So these underpin almost all voting schemes with non-trivial tally methods. For example, single transferable votes, instant runoff voting, all this kind of stuff. Not things like first past the post. And these are deployed in national elections in Norway, Estonia, Switzerland, and numerous other places in lower tier elections. So these are prime location for critical errors, and so what we'd like to do is machine check the cryptographic properties. However, several different encryption schemes are used in different variations, and that makes this hard. So in this work, what we did is we machine checked the design implementation of all the variants of the most commonly used mixed nets. So a little bit on mixed nets before I proceed. So mixed nets are this basically collection of authorities that jointly work together to transform and permute the input. So you have the input vector, and you can think of these as encrypted votes next to people's names. Now obviously we don't want to just decrypt these votes because that would reveal how everybody voted. So we put them in the mixed net, they get all permuted up, and then they come out in some random order. And what's actually happening underneath here is that we have this sequence of authorities who are each in their turn permuting and then re-encrypting the ciphertext and so on and so forth, until eventually our output is, or at least should be, the product of all of the permutations that the individual mixes used. So this is how we can make this work. Okay. So the problem here is that implementing cryptography is actually really hard, and this seems to be particularly the case in e-voting. So one significant example was with the Swiss system, which the Federal Chancellery withdrew it from use in 2019, because despite the fact they had what seemed like a really good process for developing this, it actually turned out that when this thing was made public, there were lots and lots of errors. In fact, every single zero-knowledge proof they implemented was broken in some way. So it's very hard to do, and I think the most sane way to do this is to try and machine check the properties, particularly if we can do that in a way which we can reuse well. So voting systems are this very large collection of software, and formally verifying everything is hardly a practical goal. There's just too much stuff that we'd like to verify, and moreover, even if we knew the software was sort of correct, we wouldn't actually know that the election management body was actually running the software they said they were running. The sort of techniques for remote attestation and stuff don't really work in this threat model. However, as we've best observed, we can use a whole bunch of cryptographic techniques to have something called software independence. This is the idea that the system should produce public evidence, which we can independently check, which should then prove that the result that it output was actually correct. So as I say again, this is called software independence. So then we've moved our problem. We've moved our problem for integrity from the software that's running the election to the software that's checking the evidence. But that's actually quite nice because the software checking the evidence is a lot smaller, it's happening after the election, it's a lot easier to manage than the software running the election itself. So this is precisely the fact that we exploit in this work. We sort of do this verified. Actually, we do a lot more than that, but you can read the paper for that. The main sort of thing that we want to actually use in practice is the verified, but we actually machine check a fair bit more. So the two most common mixed nets for electronic voting are Taralis-Vikström and Bayes-Groth. And in fact, the most common is actually the optimized variant of Taralis-Vikström. The Bayes-Groth one is really only being pushed by one significant member. So there are many slight variants, but essentially the optimized variant of the Taralis-Vikström mixed net works by taking the original mixed net and restricting it to the case where the ciphertext space has prime order or sufficiently close to prime order. So this style of mixnet is primarily implemented in Verifiable, which has been used in several national elections, and in the Vote2 system, which was designed for use in Swiss national elections. And the various implementations have been used to mix millions of ballots in national and lower tier elections. Now, it was proved that the original mixnet worked for wide class encryption schemes, and it was folklore that the optimized variant also worked for significant class, but an exact claim and proof had never been given previously. And the other thing that I want to mention in background is that proofs of shuffle, as with most sort of zero-knowledge proofs, can either be interactive or non-interactive. And generally the proofs are defined and proven in the interactive variant and then made non-interactive using the feature transform. And I'll talk a bit more about that later. So a little bit upon the interactive theorem prover we've used. We use an interactive theorem prover called COC. And basically what you do in this theorem prover is you give as lemmas to be proven the properties you want to hold, and then you prove that they in fact hold. And what happens is that once you've written out the proof, the interactive theorem prover can run through and check that yes, indeed, your proof is valid. It is actually a sequence of valid steps, and there's various tools that the theorem prover also provides. So let me now give you some feel for our contribution. The first page is sort of background stuff, and then we get to the more significant contributions. So there was previous work from almost the same set of authors from CCS 2019, where we mainly focused on signal protocols, but we did show that yes, actually you can do sort of mixed nets as well, but we only actually did it in that paper for 2. So if you only had 2 voters, that was fine, but of course in general you want more than that, so in this work we get rid of that restriction and we prove it for an unbounded number. We formalized the generic class of encryption schemes, which captures most or all of the encryption schemes commonly used in the voting. So we're actually going to formally define the encryption schemes for which the mixnet is going to work. And then we provide a pen and paper proof showing the optimized mixnet is actually a valid proof of shuffle for any encryption scheme in that class. So this is basically all things that were believed to be true, but we had to actually just do them to actually get to our main contributions. Okay, so then what we did is we encoded the above class of encryption schemes into COC, and machine checked the security proof that I talked about previously. So we checked that yes, if you build a mixed on top of anything inside this class, it is actually a valid proof of shuffle. And we machine checked in the time implementation of the mixnet, there was already mixnet to be complete. That is, honest parties will happily terminate. Sound, if the verifier accepts the overwhelming probability, the statement is true, and zero knowledge. It doesn't sort of leak anything more than just saying the statement. So what's the nice thing about doing this? Well, the nice thing about doing this is that it then suffices to prove that a given encryption scheme falls into this class in order to get a formally verified verifier without actually directly doing anything with the mixnet. All of that's already done for you. So you just prove the encryption scheme is there, and then you're done. So this is very nice, and it makes it very easy to reuse. Okay. So we proved in COC that both basic algomal and something called parallel algomal or multi-recipient algomal fall into this class. We also subsequently proved that some more complicated encryption schemes also fall into this class. We also proved that anything inside the class is preserved under composition, both of the same encryption scheme in parallel and the different encryption schemes in parallel. So basically, these are kind of the things that you would hope would be true, and in fact, we've proven they're true, and this allows you to do a lot of things automatically, which is very helpful. So we've done this kind of nice work. We now know that we've actually, this thing is actually secure, at least in theory. We've got nice general ways of doing it, but does it actually correspond to what's happening in practice? Are the actual mixnets that are running actually the thing we verified? So the way we did this is we took existing implementations of the Taralis-Wikström mixnet, we got proofs out of those, so they generated some proofs, and we verified those using our verifier. So we checked, and remember that soundness is basically a property of the verifier. So the fact that our verifier accepts on the proofs it produced means that that prover must actually, in some sense, be valid. The soundness property implies. Okay, so the first implementation we verified was the Verifiable mixnet, which has been used in Norway, Estonia, and Switzerland. And the second one was the Vote system, which was planned for use in the state of Geneva, Switzerland, but is currently on hold. Okay, so let me now just go over a bit of the sort of limitations or clarifications I want to make, then I'll give some future work, and then I'll sum up. So what did we verify? This is always the question you should ask. People say, oh, you verified this. Okay, you verified it, but for what properties? What did you actually verify it? So we verified, as I've said, completeness, zero knowledge, and soundness. And the first two of these, completeness and zero knowledge, actually hold perfectly. So the arguments here, there's no probabilities involved, it's just algebraic reasoning. You can actually read in the paper about the various techniques we use to actually not have to reason directly about probabilities. Okay. But some of the other properties, specifically soundness, are actually in the form of reductions to underlying hard problems. And of course, if the parameters are chosen incorrectly and the underlying problem is not hard, then in practice there is no security. The other limitation here is that we didn't actually consider side channel attacks. So the primary piece that we're interested in getting out of this is the verified software is the verify. And this is a public algorithm running only on public data, so we don't actually care about side channels with that. And we talk a bit in the paper, if you're interested, about side channels on the proof itself. So the next big caveat here is the feature mu transform. So we proved the interactive variant of the proof of shuffle. However, in practice, the non-interactive variant is invariably used. Now, all of the verifiable mixed nets that sort of come out of our functor can be made non-interactive with a 1 or 2 line change to the algorithm, but actually proving that that 1 or 2 line change is secure is left as future work. The issue here essentially is that actually formally proving what we want to prove here involves rewinding random oracles. And when you rewind random oracles, you've actually got to think about the state of the internal state of the random oracle as you rewind it. And also, not only random oracles, but also actually adversaries accessing random oracles. You've got to rewind adversaries, think about their internal state. So there's a lot of complexity here I won't go into, but we have some sort of way of trying to actually solve this, and that'll be interesting future work. And the next thing is to do with code extraction. So we defined the specification of the thing inside Coq. We proved that's secure. So that's a nice contribution in itself. But we actually run is not that specification, but a more efficient extraction of that verification. And alas, the means by which we do this is not itself formally verified. There's ongoing work in this area, but at the moment we don't know that wouldn't introduce more errors. Okay. So let me now briefly give the future work. So one of the limitations in our work here was that for completeness and zero knowledge, we proved sufficient conditions. But we didn't actually prove that the sufficient conditions were sufficient, and the reason was, while the argument that they're sufficient is fairly trivial, actually formally proving these properties, formally defining the properties that we want to prove here is actually very difficult. So we left this as future work. So it's future work that we've actually made a lot of progress on, and hopefully in future years I will share with you the results of that. The other thing we'd really like to do here is to prove the bi-Groth mixnet to be secure. So the verifiable mixnet is actually fairly simple. There's sort of one underlying Sigma protocol, and then there's one more round on top of that, or maybe 2 more rounds depending on how you do it. So it's actually a very simple thing. The bi-Groth mixnet, on the other hand, is much more complicated. There is, I think, 6 different zero-knowledge proofs that are sort of working together to get the results, and because of the complexity involved there, the actual, there's not a really nice, fully detailed argument of its proof that I believe is actually publicly available. I don't know if there's any in general. So this one is actually much more likely to have bugs, but it's much harder to do, and we need to do a lot of work to do that. We're trying to do that, but it's ongoing work. Okay. So let me just briefly summarize. So what we're doing here is we're working on online voting systems, which are using these things called verifiable mixnets to basically use as a ballot box. But these systems are actually very complicated pieces of cryptography, and they are very likely contain critical errors, which we would like to find and we would like to get rid of before they're actually run. Right? So what we've done is we went and machine checked both the design and implementation of these bits of cryptography to do what we want, and we did that in a way that gets us very good coverage with a lot of different implementations, and then we actually checked it with implementations to make sure it actually worked. And then we were able to actually verify transcripts that were produced by systems for national elections, which is very nice, but there are these kind of limitations and ongoing bits of work that we need if we're actually going to get proper coverage of all the kinds of things that people are doing in practice in this space. So thank you. If you have any questions, you can obviously email me or read the paper, and then also there's a lot more answers in there, and then also of course you can email me after that, and I look forward to seeing you at SMP.